This is the Real Footy Podcast. Coming up, Sunday provided the full suite of thrilling matches. We'll discuss those, the match review system, the teams that are cruising and those that are struggling. Right after this.
The pressure again from the Dogs. Here's a chance, Sanders. He went back inboard. Davidson has already kicked one. That's a beauty. Oh, it could be the kids. They could be the heroes. And they are within 9 points.
Through the middle. Launches long. Finlayson gets there. Oh, what a night. It goes to Graham. Is that a game saver? Is that the showdown moment? Taken away by Chris. Right foot snap. Goal. Got it. Collingwood back to 16.
Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Gleeson and joining me today are Caroline Wilson and Jake Niall. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Michael. Caro?
That must be right up there with one of the best 24 hours of condensed football matches that we've seen in a hell of a long time.
Well, having been a long-time critic of the AFL's Mother's Day fixturing, because my view has always been that they try and hide footy on Mother's Day and put in the worst games, and despite the AFL's best attempts, and they didn't really. They put in a blockbuster, GWS Geelong, which at the time they fixtured that game was clearly going to be a top four clash. Richmond West Coast at the G didn't hide it, put the Tigers on at the G in a lovely sunny Sunday afternoon. It was a really good game, not just a close game. And, finishing up with a draw in Hobart. Extraordinary.
That was also on top of Saturday night, had the showdown, a cracker of a showdown, and Gold Coast and Bulldogs. It was far be it from us, but it was to praise the AFL. But I think since the 9 game rounds, it's the lowest margins for an entire round since 2012. So that's a hell of a result because virtually there was only one game that was really. That had
a blowout.
Within,
Coming off the back of a really poor round of fixturing last week, I thought, the previous round.
Well, you could call it the mother of all Sundays. As games, the drama on them, I just think of, one game decided the showdown by an incredible mark by Mark Keane, probably. Like, if you felt
what a mark.
It's not going to win mark of the year, but it's the most consequential mark in a game this year, probably. Then there was the rundown tackle
by Tom Brown,
which was spectacular as far as we've had.
Saved the game.
And then you've had a shot for goal by Blitzarves. In that mark, where you think if Dangerfield had got the mark, would he have kicked the goal? Probably.
Well, Dangerfield had the ball in position, and he didn't go for goal, and he went to pass the ball. He also had a chance to go for goal. Even in the draw, admittedly, I was listening to this bit in the car on the way to dinner with my mum, and there were the Roos had their chances, in that last minute or two. So, I think Wardlaw and there was some Constanti.
I always, and this is carbon, not just carbon dating me really, but I always think back to that last round in the VFL of 1987. Where there was all those results that shaped the premiership. Because Kernahan's shot for goal after the siren to get Carlton first spot. There was Hawthorn beating Geelong, keeping them out of the finals, and then there was the famous game at the Western Oval where all the Melbourne supporters had to find out where Footscray was and travel out there for Robbie Flowers to get into the finals. Remember that game?
Yeah, it was an extraordinary, and it was simultaneous, which doesn't happen
it doesn't
anymore.
happen now. Now they're all staggered. But I like the staggered. I like the staggered games because we can watch these games.
Oh, it was a fantastic day of footy. Brisbane really got out of jail. To get 2 points out of that game. North and West Coast really have shown that they still don't really know how to win.
Oh, North in particular, because after last week as well against Essendon, a game that they...
North dominated that game.
That was a weird one.
West Coast should have won, I reckon. West Coast, I thought, after the first 5 minutes of the game, were just brilliant against the Tigers, and it was Richmond's experienced players who knew, even though it was Tom Brown who executed the tackle, it was the experience. The Hopper and Taranto, who've had a lot of criticism, they were fantastic.
Not Taranto hasn't.
Oh, well...
Taranto's been fantastic.
I agree, but some people have still criticised him, and I thought they were both great. All their experienced players stood up, really.
Oh, well, the other thing was, was watching Andrew McQualter in the box.
And
like, welcome to coaching, Minnie.
Yeah.
But
The move along the desk.
Do you move along the desk at the end, like out of the vision?
But then the last shot, which came back later, was when everyone was congratulating Adamuze and Tim Livingston in the Richmond box, and Chris Newman, etc. You saw McWalter's just head slumped, and he couldn't move. He actually looked completely shattered. And he's had a tough year.
Well, the Tigers had already got 2 wins on the board, so this was the Eagles' big chance.
Their one game at the G.
His old team, and the other thing was you could see in the way West Coast played a bit of Richmondism coming in with the sort of forward handball. It just looked like a different looking West Coast, even though they've been obviously very poor. There was the first sign of green shoots, really, I felt.
And the best and worst of Harley Reid, that incredible goal, and then seconds later, giving away a 50-metre penalty and a goal to Hugo Ralph-Smith. That was...
Tom Lynch too, though. I mean, you're talking about, you're talking Hopper and Taranto, and I agree the big criticism, but with Taranto,
Lynch
a lot of the criticism
were both fantastic too.
Yeah. I mean, the criticism of Taranto is probably only tied into the logic of recruiting
the
both of those
the
players.
The money and the
but
contract.
Lynch, eventually, they're throwing ball, they're getting a ball forward, and eventually he just stands amongst the five of them and just brings in this mark. You thought, well, there's the difference in class. There's the game.
He missed.
Well, yeah, I know, but they finally got the mark. Don't be so churlish, Jake.
What about the back and forward between him and Harley Reid at 3/4 time?
Oh yeah,
that was extraordinary. It just didn't stop. I don't know who started that. I must do some work on that. But it seemed like Harley Reid said something, and then Lynch just would not let go. Because he's a bit of a yapper, I gather.
Lynch is... I don't know if there's a bigger white line fever player in the AFL than Lynch, who is an absolute Labrador when you see him off the field. And then he gets on it and he's like
I've actually seen him walking his dogs.
He's the gentlest big puppy, and then he gets on the field and he wants to rip everyone's head off. He is incredible.
Oh, look, there was also a pretty dramatic Essendon Sydney game. Yeah, and that's not in the 24 in the episode of 24 with Kiefer Sutherland. It doesn't.
Jack Bauer.
Yeah, Jack Bauer. Sorry, it doesn't come in, but it was just outside of that. But that was a dramatic game too. With there was that contentious umpiring decision at the end, and the Swans coming, and these teams that lost games to another theme of the round, having a lot more entries.
That's right, inside 50s.
Before our brilliant producer has told me to ask this question, what does it say, going back to Richmond and West Coast, where are they at with their rebuilds, Jake?
Oh, Richmond are miles ahead because they've accumulated so much talent. They gave up players and got high draft picks for them in Rioli and Baker, one of the players playing who's a good player, and Graham, but more so Baker because they got a bit for him.
And Richmond's rump of experienced players are better. Like so, they've the ones
they've had more success
that
more recently.
West Coast have had are just hanging on or aren't that good. But Richmond, you've still got, as you say, Hopper, Taranto, Nankervis, Broad, Vlosten, Lynch up for. There's
Short who had to pull out.
Short.
I think that Richmond had a few wasted years after the last flag in 2020, and last year was the mother of wasted years. I mean, a new coach, a CEO who was on the way out from March, 4 players who were on the way out from March, really. You felt like they were treading water. You felt like the midfield on some occasions just wasn't even really trying. I mean, that's the way it felt watching them.
Yeah.
So it went from, this terrible year, and even Brendan Gale said in a podcast that Adamuze sat back and observed it all, which it was an extraordinary comment about a new coach. So a wasted year, really, a year of treading water. And you just feel like already, 8 or 9 debutants already, another one yesterday in Sims. I think there's an enormous... This has been a really enjoyable year, even though you've got to sit through games like the Hawthorn game the previous week.
It was always going to be when they bring in that number of first-round draft picks or picks under 25 in last year's draft, just the welter of talent, the amount of talent coming in, it's exciting.
But they're playing them all.
They've won 3
games.
games. And now we're asking the question of West Coast, will they win a game this year? Well, they will, but like Minnie McWalter is sitting there going, I don't know where it's going to come from, but...
Well, people forgetting that they ran Essendon to 2 points. Like, that was only a couple of weeks ago. And Essendon were lucky to get out of that. I mean, they're at the other end of it. Essendon have won games that very narrowly, and that's given them 5 wins.
Yeah.
Jake, was the MRO right not to penalise merit?
My instinct was when I saw it that he would get cleared because the ball was sort of thereabouts and it didn't, I wasn't 100%, but I thought he'd probably get off. And that was my instinct watching the incident live. But when you slow them down, I always have this thing of when you slow it down, it can look worse.
Thing is,
what did you think was?
I was really conflicted with it because you could see what he was planning to do. He was just trying to clip the ball over the top, and he did get the ball. But it's like, if you come in, even though you get the ball, you still have the duty of care, knowing your action is likely to cause someone else to be hit in the head. So I thought that they probably would have sided him, and he would have raised that. It would have been another issue where you would question the validity of the idea that Laura Kane raised of revisiting the schedule of penalties for careless acts.
Well, that would be the Brownlow penalty, though, in part.
Yeah, well, it would, but
he'd have to be close to leading, wouldn't he?
But this would be one that would go from like the Curtis one, where it would go from nothing to 2 or 3 weeks.
The Curtis one was just...
We still don't know if Blakey was actually concussed in that, but he was assessed for it and was later to go. So,
and a vital player. The other thing is Blakey being a vital player. Now, my instinct was watching it, he'll get off, because it was like, I'm not certain. It's almost like a rule is if I'm in doubt about it, then he's probably going to get off. That's how I sort of assessed it, Caro. If I'm not sure, then he's going to get off.
And Jake, Willie Rioli's a vital player. And you say the mark saved the game for Adelaide, but Willie Rioli not playing was probably
could have cost them.
Yeah, I think it definitely cost them. And Willie Rioli was being punished. So
if he'd played in the mental state he was in, which we were all aware of, having covered this to some degree during the week, he may have been really at sea playing. But there were so many opportunities for Port Adelaide to score in scrimmages in their front 50. The Crows having this enormous difficulty clearing the ball and just kept kicking it back to Port midfielders. And players like Horn Francis and Butters and Rosie pumping it in. There was a shot for goal that Rosie took where I thought, as I watched it in my mind, I said, if that's Willie Rioli, that's a goal. And, yeah. And
to timecode this conversation, we're early the following week and Willie Rioli's back. It's the start of 2 weeks of the Sir Doug Nicholls rounds of footy. Where do you sit on how the AFL have handled this?
I think they handled it very poorly. I mean, I would have said that they seem to have. I wrote something about on the weekend that there seems to be problems with off-field penalties because they're not operating according to a clear set of principles. Not like
which is something Paul Marsh has been calling.
Yeah,
for
I think
years.
If you we've discussed Bolter right here at quite a bit, and Gleeson was probably the first onto that whole topic, and we've all weighed into it in some form. And it when that's the same as Faye, and then you sort of. How are they? They look very ad hoc.
Josh Faye from GWS.
GWS, yeah. So it looks like there's a reaction to an incident, and then the media blows up about it, and then there's a reshuffle. With this one, they've done Willie Rioli a disservice because if Willie Rioli had just been sanctioned on Monday, his whole week looks different. He might have even been given a suspended sentence. Well, you guys are.
Well, I think there was also. I don't buy the AFL's explanation. I think the AFL realised that they misread it, and that there should have been a penalty, and they've retrospectively gone back and said, well, we will penalise. The other incidents that came out were nonsense. They weren't. They cited them. They weren't the reason they gave him the. They were the excuse for giving the other penalty.
But as Jake said, there was a pile-on and the AFL reacted.
Well, there's a pile-on because they've made a bad decision.
Yes, look.
There was a pile-on on Bolter and they didn't go back and revisit it, and they probably should have.
I've been sort of slow to be too critical of Andrew Dillon and Laura Kane, because, Andrew's in his second year. I think he was diminished a bit by the length of time it took to appoint him, another year to get in because Gillen wouldn't go and they didn't want Gillen to go. Then the commissioner saying you need to appoint a COO. So he's clearly, his level of authority doesn't look great, and Laura for similar reasons, with her needing a number 2, etc. I thought it was their worst week by the length of a straight last week, and the lack of leadership. And again, they might come out in the days that get closer to the first game that celebrates the Indigenous round. And, we're going to get around Steve and Michael and celebrate all that's brilliant about our game. But where have they been? Why have we not heard from Tanya Hosh? We interviewed Chris Davies, the Port Footy manager, on Saturday on 3AW. I mean, he was so strong on the racism Willie has faced that leads to this frame of mind. David Koch has been so strong. Ken Hinkley. We've not heard one word from an organisation that the last leadership at the AFL, their biggest blot on Gillan McLaughlin's leadership was Adam Goodes. And we're heading down this road again.
Well, but and I think that, to be fair, the AFL was in the back of their mind about why they ended up with such a non-penalty for Willie in the first instance. They were prepared to entertain the full facts of the case and look at, who is this guy? Was it actually a serious thing? He pulled it down. He was contrite. Do we want to drive him out of the game to the Islander that we're going to just punish? And they were trying to take a non-punitive sort of path, but it becomes farcical when you're punishing others for things like flipping the bird.
When the pylon happens, and I'm told that when they were told on that CEO hookup on Thursday, when the CEOs were told you've got to dob people in, you've got to tell us about these incidents, don't just leak it to the media. Well, I gather some CEOs just openly scoffed at them. Coaches second-hand hearing it openly scoffed.
Of course they did. Why? That was schoolboy stuff.
So why then say, I think they justified the suspension, and the suspension was irrelevant because he'd already stood down.
So it was like...
it was grandstanding.
It was like suspending a player who's got a 3-week hamstring.
Yeah,
it was like that.
But to make a point for no reason, and the words I think that we use were, it shows a pattern of behaviour. Please.
I think the problem is that if you're always guiding, if your answer, I brought up on the weekend, and it's a touchy subject, but Taron Thomas. Now, Taron Thomas, North were right to sack him, and the AFL was right to clearly suspend him, and he got the longest suspension other than a drug case we've seen, and his behaviour is completely unacceptable. At the same time, they were responding to the zeitgeist around an overdue correction towards more mindfulness around mistreatment of women.
Treatment of women.
They were reacting to that. But do we doubt? And I'm not going to go over all the other people who've done things. I'm not going to go over all of them. There's a litany of people. Taron Thomas was given a harder penalty because of a shift in how the AFL was trying to position themselves on that issue. So that's not to defend anything he's done, but to point out that they react very heavily to whatever the prevailing mood is.
Well, the same
and
thing.
It's just like there's not a consistent line of Paul Marsh is right.
Well, the same thing happened last year.
I'm sorry we haven't heard from Paul Marsh though, Michael. We haven't heard from the Players Association about Willie Rioli. And I know this is another. Paul Marsh is on the way out. I'm not saying he's not doing his job at the moment, but I would imagine he's working on a couple of things they need to finish up. Maybe like the illicit drugs policy, etc. Doesn't excuse the fact that no one from a position of leadership, apart from Port Adelaide, has come out and said anything on what I feel is a really big and potentially divisive issue.
Well, they also represent Bailey Dale. That'd be pretty unnerving.
And Port Adelaide have said repeatedly, Willie did the wrong thing. We've read him the riot act. We're furious with him.
If you have principles, Caro, Gleeson, then you don't get mixed up in this thing of, if we do this, it'll look like that. If we do this, it'll look like this. If we do this, it'll be this for Willie, or it'll be this for...
Well, why haven't we heard one word from Andrew Dillon? And why hasn't he sat down with Willie Rioli? This is a massive issue, and I just can't understand why he's been so silent.
I think I'm critical of how they've handled it. I would say my gut feel is they have a tendency to say, if we talk about it, we feed it. And I think it's a deliberate calculus to not feed issues that then become bigger by them talking about them, which suits us, doesn't suit them.
There is
hasn't suited them this time.
No.
They look foolish and weak, in my view.
It's an interesting contrast there, because we start with the point of saying they're going to revisit the schedule of punishments for on-field events, because they've got mandatory sentencing, basically. You fall in these categories, bang, you're there.
It is difficult. You make a homophobic slur.
I thought they got the homophobic slur right.
Yeah, but they took a long time to get there, and every time there is one now, the penalty gets bigger.
But if they
flap your arms like an aeroplane and swear.
You know why it takes so long? Because they don't know what they're trying to do.
So hang on, Jake. Even saying if they got the homophobic slur right, how's Willie in 1 week? what was it, 5 weeks? Massive penalty for saying something in the heat of the moment on the field, and you say afterwards, and the wrong thing, absolutely the wrong thing to say, but contrite, walk it back,
Jeremy
apologise.
Finlayson was 3 weeks, wasn't he? And then the next
the word used, according to people in the gay community I consulted,
the F word.
The F word is of the same scope as the N word in race.
And just let me finish the point, which is absolutely, if that's the right punishment, in the heat of the moment saying something and immediately being contrite, walking back and apologising, the same things that mitigated the penalty for Willie into nothing. But Willie was after the event, in the cold light of day, tapping something out on his phone to send to someone. I don't see how they can be so far apart in penalty.
No, I agree with that. And I agree that they probably thought they were doing the right thing. I mean, they completely deny that there was race involved in their decision, that they were going easy on Willie because of what he's been through. But if that is true, then surely there needed to be a conversation with Willie Rioli. And that didn't happen until all the dibber-dobber stuff from Geelong and Essendon came out.
Well, however you frame it.
From AFL Integrity.
However you frame it, it's a stuff-up.
I mean, in fairness, Andrew Mackey took it seriously enough to call Chris Davies from Port after the Geelong one happened. But I think
that was also, they were a bit more consumed at that time, weren't they, with the fact that Geelong didn't get Jeremy Cameron off the ground for concussion.
Yes.
So there was a lot going on in that game.
There's always something going on.
All right, we'll take a break.
They've handled concussion well this week too, haven't they? 4 umpires and no one notices.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that after this.
We're online all the time. Just search Age Real Footy on Facebook or Twitter.
Weddle clever. Give it back to Weddle. Strolls in. 35 out. Another one for the brown and gold.
Well, welcome back. The Hawks battled for 3 quarters and admitted they were clunky, James Sicily said, and said, well, we're like everyone else. We're a bit clunky, but they got
According
the job
to you,
done.
everyone's a bit clunky.
Well, everyone's
this
a bit
year
clunky. Well, they are. There's very few teams that haven't had their clunk. It said a bit more about Melbourne, really. They just can't score.
No. How many years are we going to be talking about this, Jake? When are they going to get their act together?
Look, it's. I think it's all going to come to a head at the end of the year, I would say.
Well, they've got the president's overseas. The CEO's running some big event in Melbourne in September, so he can't start properly until.
Well, Melbourne's not going to be occupying him in September.
They'll be. The joke goes, they'll be at the Snow.
They may as well be.
Yeah.
They may as well be, Jake. I'm amazed that the lack of leadership at that club is that we look to Max Gawn now. That's who we can look to.
Max is the media spokesman, the captain.
Yep.
The de facto
president. Simon Goodwin's been pretty good publicly. I mean, I think he's been good in the way he's defended his players.
I'll give him a rap here. We've got this on the run sheet here that Clayton Oliver's tagging role. Simon Goodwin addressed that very well, I thought. When he talked about what his role was on John Newcombe, what he did, and how he pleased he was, and I liked it as a move. I thought it was an example of the whole discussion of Clayton Oliver and the president had got on the front foot. It was quite, interesting. I didn't mind it, even though I was one of the people who'd written something, and he wasn't happy with a whole bunch of journalists for their what he saw as invasions of Clayton's privacy, but. The coach came out, gave him a positive role in the sense of giving him a negative role on a player. Yeah. But I thought it was a good move.
Yeah, it was. This game also illustrated, there was that moment, Cozzy Pickett, he gets tripped at the top of the goal square, and then there's an umpire within 10 metres, seemingly, just off the picture.
Is that one you want them in the year? Like Sam McClure has talked about quite a lot.
There's 4 of them out there. And none of them managed to see the bloke get mugged in the goal square. And then it goes to Sicily's at the goalpost, throws the ball to himself. No one noticed that. I mean, I know, Higgins won goal of the year in 2018 doing the same sort of thing, throwing it around the post and kicking it out of the air.
Come on, that was a goal.
Well, it was counted as a goal, but you can't throw the ball.
No, I know.
I mean, we all sort of quite happily let that one go because it was such an inventive and good goal. But you can't throw the ball.
Yeah.
And so they were effectively denied 2 goals in that bit of play. And I mean, they kicked one, the next one doesn't happen. But having missed Pickett, they needed to have picked up Sicily. they didn't have a good weekend, the umpires, when you look at that. And then Lockie Schultz is prone on the ground with one arm flapping in the air, knocked out.
Oh, no, that wasn't good to watch.
And you've got, I think it was Darcy Moore after the game who spoke out against that, or I think it was.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I mean, again,
president.
you've got leaders from within clubs now taking a stand, and the AFL just saying nothing. And I know that we all, in the end, Laura Kane chose not to speak every week about this, but I think someone had to come out and make it. I mean, and they admitted it was a mistake and that no one knew.
Yeah.
But given that this is a first-order priority for them, I would have thought it would be a first-order priority for the umpires, even if they are rebuilding.
Well, it was pretty clear the bloke was, in some real trouble lying on the ground, out, one arm's just pointing up in the air. And you'd seen the incident. Everyone saw the incident, knows that was going to be pretty heavy. It was a heavy knock and that
I don't think we'll see
there was a
him
fair
for
chance. No,
multiple weeks, I
if he's
would
back.
expect. I've not spoken to Colin.
Are we going to be seeing much more of Justin Longmuir as a coach?
Well, I'm pretty confident he'll go to the end of the year, but you couldn't be confident that he would retain his position on this new contract that Simon Garlick announced of being a club employee.
Non-contract,
which is really all about what the terms of payout are, isn't it?
Yeah.
That sort of deal.
They wouldn't commit to him, and they were right not to. And unfortunately, it hasn't worked for Justin Longmuir.
Well, it's not working. They've given him and the list mate. They've built a list that is finals worthy, and they're not looking close at the moment. They need those home games. I mean, to have such an imbalance in inside 50s and be unable to win the game, and partly because that inside 50 count was a bit misleading because they were kicking it in.
Do you think
to Collingwood to mark?
Do you think that that Collingwood would have gone over that without admitting it? Would have gone Gleeson to those two games, which is Geelong and then Fremantle. Rested Jeremy Howe the first game, then rested the 4 players, which was all in train last week and probably well before that. Let's be blunt. And thought, well, we'll get one of these two, but it'll probably be.
I think they would have
probably be Geelong.
Yeah, I think they would have thought they'd beat Geelong and probably drop Fremantle, but drop those players, manage those players in order to maybe have some fresh legs, but also then preserve the coming games.
It was an 8-point win, wasn't it? Really, because they, the 5-day break. The players they were resting, which is going to be smart list management going forward. To me, that cements them as a top 4 team, unless something goes horribly wrong in June like it used to for them. It doesn't seem to anymore. That was an unbelievable win. And, Freo, that will, to me, that's the coach killer, that game. Yeah. And I'm trying, it sounds bad. It sounds like I'm death riding Justin Longmuir.
It's early, but the signs are, the signs are very bad. I don't think if you're a club, after what's happened with various clubs, you're not going to be making that call now. You're going to be preparing the ground.
You've got some pretty good coaches coming out of contract and not coaching at all, Jake. You've got to be thinking about the next year now. I'm sorry. I hate to be brutal,
their
but
forwards just offered nothing, So Amos is terribly out of form. Tracy was not bad. Voss kicked one and celebrated well, but didn't do anything else. They've got Jackson and
look at the way they kicked it in.
But they've got the play. What I'm saying is they've had that control enough in the midfield to get the ball in that number of times.
A lot of their
entries
and they had
the method of entry was really poor, and the forwards were poor, and they had no pressure on the ball in that forward line. This is Jackson and Darcy in the team. They've had enough weapons with Bolton to be able to win that game. And
they didn't, and who could say that today that they're shocked, given the histories of those two clubs recently?
Well, Jake,
I'm surprised.
You sat here last Monday.
I thought they'd win.
Yep,
I did.
And I almost texted you and said, that's the last time I take your advice on tipping.
I really thought, look at the entries.
I was the same. I thought.
Look, you would have thought everything pointed, 5-day break, everything pointed to a Fremantle win. And
Which makes the loss
worse. Even the statistics during the game.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. The 28, 28 less entries. How many games do teams lose? Not many. I just want to say that for all that we're doing the entrails of Fremantle, but Jamie Elliott, I think it would be remiss of us not to mention what a wonderful player he has been and what a highlight reel player he is and how good he has been. And probably, I'd put him on the list with Nick Flostone and Libber as another non-All-Australian. He may not have quite had the years that
Well,
other players have had, but over his career, he's a fantastic
The
player.
way he stood up in big moments and in big games.
He's had a couple of seasons where he was on track for All-Australian, and then he got injured and missed the second half of the year.
He's had bad luck.
He missed basically 2 full seasons with his back. Last year, I thought he was done. I thought he'd slowed up. Evidently, that vascular issue that he had was really impairing him more than we recognised. And it wasn't just age catching up with him; it was an actual problem. And I think he's just, to me, I have him just below Robbie Gray as that. They're very similar types of players. That Robbie's probably didn't miss the games with injury, but that same sort of just match winner. Jamie doesn't play on ball as much as Robbie was able to, but just a dynamic player those players that are incredibly hard to match up on because you need someone quick enough and tall enough to go with them in the air, but also on the ground, and really hard player.
Yeah, but he's also a pretty humble character. Like there's not a lot of look at me about the guy, and he's
There isn't the way he plays though.
Yes,
great to watch.
Very watchable. Meanwhile, the Gold Coast get a win at the Fortress up in Darwin over the Bulldogs, which was not unexpected because of their record up there. But that's a huge win for them. And talking of 5-day breaks, they run into a 5-day break, though Hawthorn was also off a 5-day break, but they then have the travel into Darwin, which I think is going to, for me, that's really significant for Hawthorn. They'll, when you've got the 5 days and you're travelling, Gold Coast have got the 5 days and they're staying in Darwin for the whole time. Hawthorn get off the plane in Darwin and go, bang, the heat hits you, the humidity hits you.
Yeah, it didn't diminish the Bulldogs' finals chances in my eyes
No,
at all.
no.
I mean, I'm still as I wasn't at the start of the year, but I am now. Bullish about them.
They've been excellent, and they were pretty spirited. This was again the last quarter was exciting.
Yeah,
the game up there, not that many people there, but it was the Bulldogs went a bit helter skelter around the ball, and right at the end, Bailey Dale had a chance to sort of get it forward, and he just fumbled slightly, and then the packs descended on him, and it got turned back over. But there was a chance for the Bulldogs to pinch this, which would have been a steal.
It would have been a steal because I think they were dominating play for much of it. The Suns, they looked good. I think there's a couple of, we've spoken about this before, but there's an increasing Richmondness about them and the makeup of the team, and players like, I mentioned it to you before, Jake, but Ben Long is a very Damien Hardwick player. He's he's got that, grunt and grit about him, and plays like, that's the role up forward. He was brought in as a defender, as a running defender from St Kilda, and he's now found this role as that sort of, he's got him and he's got Holman and Ullman behind the ball. These guys that are just got a bit of mongrel to them, picked up Rioli and Noble to have that run.
Well, I'll just say this too. If you think of how Damien Hardwick coaches, and his teams are aggressive, and he was a very aggressive player, and he coaches, he likes players that are a bit of a Kevin Sheedy, bit of the back pocket, Mick Malthouse, bit of that about him. And even though he was an accountant, not a plumber, he would. How important, please, would Matthew Rowell and Caro be to Damien Hardwick to keep him at that club?
Oh, absolute primary.
The number one player to have, given the way that he coaches.
So. I think so.
And Anderson.
I feel like that surely they'll keep him. Surely they'll keep him. If they can finish top 4 this year, why would Matthew Rowell leave?
I wouldn't.
I reckon there was a little bit of tension between them last year. I don't know whether the relationship clicked straight away.
No.
And I think that there's a bit of that about, let's just see how the relationship works and how the team's going this year before he goes.
I think at the end of last year there was a lot of good Gold Coast players and more senior players too just going, when is this going to happen?
Yeah.
Like, what is wrong with this football club, and doubting themselves and doubting the club and doubting its culture. Now, we still don't know whether... Because, they were looking good this time last year too.
Oh, I think they're pretty right.
Well,
this feels different.
They've had a softer draw.
They've had a good
until
fixture,
now.
Jake.
They've had an extremely charitable fixture.
And they were pretty ordinary. Well, they were obviously very ordinary against Richmond and not great against Brisbane either. So let's just see. But
Brisbane's just better than them. But this was their best win. I think beating Sydney at the time felt like a good win, but Sydney's, in free fall from injuries. This was their best win. Albeit it's in Darwin. If they played this in Ballarat, Bulldogs win this.
Oh, absolutely. No, look, if they can beat Hawthorn, I think if they make finals, why would Matt Rowell leave after everything?
Well, why wouldn't he just? Most people think he'll just sign a 2-year deal for free agency.
Yep.
Maybe he'll weigh up something longer, Glees.
Yeah. They do become one of those ones where you go, so you're signing 2 years. So we're going to be back here in 6, 8, 12 months' time doing this again, are we?
Go and meet the same clubs or a couple of different ones.
Same clubs, yeah. All right, we'll take a break there. Come back with quick questions.
Get access to every episode as it drops. Hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
To seal the game for the Blues. Oh, he loves it. He absolutely loves it. Clutch from Harry Mackay.
Well, welcome back. Straight into quick questions. Should Carlton put Tom de Koning's contract offer on the back burner and prioritise Jack Silvani? Caro.
Well, can't they chew gum and walk at the same time? They should be prioritising both. Jack Silvani will re-sign, won't he? I don't think there's any... They need to make him a decent offer. He's had a brilliant season.
Yeah.
And Tom de Koning, they need to re-sign him too. But should that... What do you think, Jake? You're the expert in this area. Are you worried that he might go? And if so, they need to be smart about what they get for him?
I'd laugh if he got an offer from St Kilda. Both of them got offers from St Kilda with certain family.
His dad's there.
Yeah, I know. That would look. I would be surprised if Jack Silvani didn't re-sign for on much better terms. He's
on an ordinary deal at the moment, but he's having his best season.
Yeah, well, I said on after the game, Jack. He was a jack of all trades. Now he's a master of one. Which is playing back.
He's happy with his own work, isn't he, today?
I am,
Quoting
Jay Niall.
Quote myself, yeah. Well, no one responds to it, but anyway.
It's a very good line, Jake.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
You too. Tell us more lines, Jake.
Okay. Point taken.
As far as back burner, though, I actually reckon Carlton's got to the point where they just go, that's what we've got for de Koning. That's it. We're not going to go to 1.7 or whatever. No. And we don't think you should for a ruckman and for that length of time. So I reckon they're in the perfect spot to say, that's it. If he stays, great. If he goes, money goes out, they get a first-round draft pick. Simple.
Can I just say quickly too, that was not a good game to watch, even though it was close. That was let's say a highly congested game.
St Kilda.
It was a great.
Not dissimilar to Freo St Kilda the week before. Not as bad.
This wasn't St Kilda's fault.
Doing this one. I think it suited Carlton actually.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they won, and de Koning, I agree 100%. You can't change much of what they've offered. No. They've offered plenty.
Yep.
We're going to listen to a question from North supporter Ben. Do the pundits need to be more realistic about how long a rebuild takes? Example, Carlton from 2015 didn't play finals until 2023. Melbourne also took 7 or 8 years. I think the answer to that, Ben, is going to be an obvious Hawthorn. No.
Geelong, or whether Geelong never rebuild. No, I don't think we need to be more realistic about it. I think rebuilding can be a complete cop-out. Let's face it, Carlton haven't really, Jake, threatened since the salary cap scandal. I mean, or even earlier, since they made that grand final by stealth.
Well, there are rebuilds. There are personnel rebuilds. Then there are cultural rebuilds. And
Carlton's has been both.
And
they're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
That was 99, their last grand final.
I reckon the recalibration, the reassessment of these things should be about that it takes longer for crappier clubs. When I say crappier, the smaller clubs that can't attract players.
That's not Carlton.
Well, it is North Melbourne.
Carlton have got a massive
St
brand.
Kilda, the clubs that struggle to land
not as
big
massive
players.
As it was.
They've got a hell of a lot of people barrack for them.
They do, and they should have been better, and they should have been better by now. And they wasted time by picking wrong coaches and having poor administrations in the past.
And
not
infighting.
saying now. So, and who was the other one?
My point is, if you're a club that has plays in front of crowds, has got money, has got some panache, then they can build through the draft and then attract the free agents. Some of these other clubs, they just can't land the free agents. That's why you end up with a St Kilda having to offer really big dollars for a player that to go way beyond what others will pay because they can't land them otherwise.
But
Hawthorn
Melbourne
will
are
pick
a
them up.
small
Collingwood
club,
will
and
pick
they
them up.
managed to get Lever and May,
Yep.
which was an unbelievable result looking back.
They gave up Hogan.
Sorry?
They gave up Jesse Hogan.
And they missed Houston.
But they won a flag. They did win a flag.
Yep.
I mean, and they hadn't won one since the mid-60s. So it was a pretty good effort. So I think that Melbourne's rebuild took way too long. I mean, Richmond were dreadful for 3 decades. And so you're right, some clubs. But now Richmond will be an interesting test case because they completely botched their strategy after winning in 2020.
Yeah.
But here we are sitting only 5 years later and feeling a bit boyish about the Tigers.
Yeah. Look, I think the crucial difference is the clubs that break the chain of continuity with senior players, where you don't have senior players like Selwood and Hawkins and Dangerfield, then teaching the next group, or Pendlebury helping Nick Dacos, or these sort of things. The clubs that break that chain and they don't have those players in that position take a long, long time. And if you do have those players that are there, and sometimes they're coming towards the end of their career, a la Nick Dacos with Pendlebury and Sidebottom, and you get a sweet spot. Those clubs that are in the wilderness forever, the chain was broken.
Which is what Alistair Clarkson did when he traded out all his champions, when they had 2 years to go or 3 years to go.
But they still had a lot of senior players.
Yeah,
though.
but they had a bad 4 or 5 year period, more 5-6 years.
Tell it to Carlton. That seems like nothing.
I know, but they're a better club, Hawthorn. And St Kilda, obviously, in the Chris Pelkin days, traded out all those good players too.
All right, quick questions.
Sorry.
Who do you think will be leading the Brownlow after round 9?
Nick Dacos.
Zach Merritt.
Zach Merritt for me, I reckon. Dacos will be in the... missed a couple lately.
Another one, Libba, I think will be up there.
Well, he's had the continuity of games, whereas Bonton has come in and hasn't missed so many early. And
another one, Matthew Rao will poll really well.
And another one, Lachie Neale, even when they lose.
Well, he didn't have his best game yesterday on Sunday.
No, but he'll still get votes. That's all we've got time for. Thanks to both of you and for joining us. Thanks also to Channel 7 and Fox Footy for the audio we've used in this episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so via email, realfootypod@theage.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. The Tipping Podcast will be back with a couple of minor tipsters on Thursday. Catch you then.